Good evening, guys. Just in the process of making some bread. I think one of my first talks, I actually started making bread, and I actually 3 times longer I was kneading it than usual, and it turned out magical. So this one should also come out good. So the longer I talk, hopefully the better the bread. A couple of days ago I was talking about Attila the Hun, and after watching it I realised I left out some interesting points that should have been included. Actually his death, and also it's very common in his, with all the documentation through history with the Hungarian chronicles and writers, they always mention that he's the grandson of Nimrod. So Nimrod is like an important part of our ancestry, and also it's interesting, the Arabs and Jews don't really write positive about him. And so it's interesting because the Arabs and Jews were very common throughout our history, all the way through with the Huns and Scythians, even through Khazaria. There's mention of the Jews there, and many times they came under the protection of the Hungarian Kingdom, and they have different groups of Jews as well. Which is, in another lecture I'll put a interesting information together about what the Huns have collected of their experience with Arabs and Jews, and how they played a part with living within Hungary. But they got two main groups anyway: the Ashkenazi and the that were around Poland and Germany, who speak the Yiddish language. And the other group are from the Sephardic, which are from southern Spain, in that area, and they had a lot of affiliation with, and they actually have different synagogues to one another, and different rituals, different languages. One speaks Yiddish, which is like a German tongue. So, and they've been fighting against it amongst one another for a very long time. They don't like each other. So much of the trouble is between, a lot of the wars are between those two, and they ended up anyway. But what I'll do is, I was attending lectures. I remember throughout the lectures they always mention their roles, in history. So, and it's not available in mainstream. It is, but it's very tough researching their history, because it's it's a lot of contradictory information. It's very difficult. But anyway, I'd rather put a proper discussion about it. I'd rather collect all the information, that way it'll flow, because it just, at the moment, I haven't got all that info on them. But getting back to Attila, so he died. I should have mentioned how he died. He died with a nosebleed on his wedding night, and the following day, all the Huns were disappointed and sorrow for months, and in his death, because the world king had died, and the Hun Empire was huge. It stretched all the way from the Carpathian Basin right across to the borders of China, all along the top of India. So if you ever have a chance, look at Attila's kingdom. It's huge, back in the 4th century. So he died in 453. Another thing I forgot to mention was actually, getting back to the nosebleed, it's interesting because the blood, because the Hungarians and the Huns, the Scythians, the Avars, Magyars all use the blood as a blood covenant. So dying from a nosebleed also has some kind of a deeper meaning because of the blood, and he dies in his sleep with the blood. And so again, the dream and sleep, usually even Emesha, for Amos, they predict their birth is through dreams. So dreams are, but it happens historically a lot. Even Alexander, a lot of people, Alexander the Great, and nearly every king has messages coming through their dreams. So even Mother Mary, and so it's very common. Dreams is where a lot of messages come through. So it doesn't just, it's not only relevant for the Hungarians. It's more for across the board. However, another important battle they talk about is the Battle of the Catalonia Plains in 451, and Attila died in 453. Yeah, I think it's 451, the battle, Catalonian Plains. It's where they write that the Huns were defeated. But it's so interesting, they write how he was defeated, but a lot of times they can't even find where the battlegrounds were. Or there's a big debate about that, where the actual battle consisted of. But the interesting part about it is, if you really look at what happened afterwards and during the battle, the leader of I think they had 4 generals, but one of the generals died, Theodorus, on the battlefield, and the other guy, Flavius Artius, he left the battlefield, and after that never had another battle, or went to. If he was so glorious in beating Attila Hun, why straight after the fight he was or battle he never, there was no written history of any glory or giving him any accreditation for it. Like if someone would have beaten Attila the Hun, he'd be lifted to some high status. But there's nothing. If anything, he ends up being murdered, assassinated, and the records of being drunk, and he never fought afterwards. And also, the Attila was still on the battlefield. So the person who stays on the battlefield and everybody leaves is a winner. So again, and all these history channels, documentaries, all talk about, they've defeated Attila the Hun, and it does my head in, continuously hitting this trash history about the Hungarians. Really does, really does. So Hungarians and anybody else who doesn't, Hungarian, just be very careful the history how it's written. It's so frustrating when I remember I was reading about Attila the Hun when I was in Australia, all the Western versions of him, and it's disgusting. You kind of think he was just a barbarian. The way they lived and fought was like heartless, but it turns out totally opposite. So, I highly recommend don't believe the mainstream history on a lot of things, especially the people that control our history now aren't the good guys. They're wolves in sheep's clothing. So anyway, I got to that. That's another thing. When Priscus, I mentioned, went to the palace of Attila, they didn't mention that they claim it was a beautiful wooden palace, grand. Not to mention Attila himself ate off wooden plate, wooden goblets, and he sat on a wooden throne with a lot of and his clothing was very humble. It wasn't grand or ostentatious, as they say. So, yeah, it was quite. Wait, I've got my glass of wine. I'm a little bit thirsty. So, Attila was supposedly, just his palace was really made of wood. So obviously that's why they can't find it. Could have got burnt easily or over the centuries, because that was in the 4th century. And they claim the people that went there, the congregation that went there, the delegates from Eastern Byzantine time, or Eastern Rome, they they ate on gold and silver plates and silverware. So he had both. But they said he drank from the wooden goblet and ate from a wooden plate and the whole thing. And again, wood and timber is like close to the tree of life. So he would have been more than likely associated with that. The tree of life is very, very important to the Huns. What else can I mention? I forgot to mention there was when Priscus was traveling through the Hun Empire, he stopped to rest, and this Greek, obviously this Greek guy recognized that Priscus was from Greece, so this Greek merchant went up to Priscus, and they started talking Greek to him. And Priscus was really surprised because a lot of the Huns weren't really speaking Greek. It wasn't a common language in the Hun Empire. And he spoke very good, fluent Greek, and he was surprised. He goes, what are you doing in the Hun Empire? He was curious because you speak so well Greek, you know. And the merchant goes, I was taken as a slave during a battle, and after proving my honor, I was freed, and I was given freedom in the Huns and given rights as a citizen. And then Priscus asked him, it's all actually, a lot of this is actually available under Priscus's writing. It's got 8 volumes, so I mentioned that in the previous. So this is part of it too. So the merchant goes, after my freedom, I had the choice of going back to Greece, but I prefer to stay in the Hun Empire. And he goes, why? Why would you do that? And the Greek merchant was saying, well, since living amongst the Huns, their laws are more just. And he was saying that in Byzance, if you go to court to try and prove your innocence, the fees of, just like today, the fees are so high that even by the time you prove your innocence, if you're lucky, you'll be in your grave because the court cases get pulled out for so long. Plus, they're very expensive, like today. And he said, not to mention that the tax burden on the citizens is just phenomenal. He said, and also that will ruin you by the end of the court case. There's heavy taxes you have to pay in Byzance. So and he said here in Hungary, Hun Empire, it's if you have a issue, the courts sort it out quickly, and the laws are just. So again, this is a Greek merchant telling Priscus, and again it's written down. So that was an interesting part of describing the Hun Empire as well. What else we got here? Catalina Flavius, I've got that. Yeah, okay. Another important part of before I get into that, I've got to see that. I want to keep track of what I'm talking about, so I have some kind of flow. Today I bought a bottle of Slovenian wine at one of the markets. And that's the first time I'm actually drinking Slovenian red wine. I don't know the grape, but it's damn nice. It's kind of a little bit like a Merlot, but perfect. It's very dark ruby, purple, red. So probably have red lips or tongue by the end of this. It's very dark. I don't know whether you can see that. Look. So very high in antioxidant. All right, talking about Slovenia, I've got to mention a good story about Slovenia. Slovenians, they adore King Marchash, or King Matthew. He was from 15th century. I think I've spoken to him about before. And they adore him because he did a lot for the Slovenians. They have a lot of stories, mythologies, folk tales about him. And they hired him because he protected them against, on many occasions, because Slovenia was never a separate kingdom. It was always under the Hungarian kingdom. So, as far as I remember, I was talking to a professor and they said that. I remember asking the question, well, other nations around us, some were, so, yes, Slovenia have got a really cool story. And I remember, there's so much information on King Matthew that'll demand a separate discussion as well. But the interesting part about King Matthew is he's got a story that Slovenians tell their kids, that there's amongst the mountains, which is very hilly and beautiful. Slovenia, they've got beautiful lakes and waters and rivers and whitewater rafting and skiing. A lot of people go there for skiing. Even my father used to talk about Slovenia because it used to be part of former Yugoslavia, and he said the Slovenians used to hate Serbs and Croatians, but when it came to Hungarians, when they found out there was Hungarian, he served in the army there, that they really loved the Hungarians. And the other people in his platoon, because Slovenians can be pretty stubborn, so when they found out Dad was Hungarian, they treated him real well, And Dad said that was the best part of Yugoslavia at the time. It was beautiful, people were friendly. It was most so yeah. And he always talked about Slovenia as being a nice place. So anyway, going back to the story of that the Slovenians have about King Marchash is there's amongst the mountains there's a peasant going through on his horse and cart up over the hills and roads deep into the mountains, and as he comes over this hill he sees this hut on top of the hill and this man standing outside of the hut, dressed up with a sword. And as the peasant's going up the top of the hill, the knight walks out. It's a knight actually walks out, stops the peasant, and they start the discussion. The peasant goes, "Oh, what are you doing in the middle of nowhere out here?" And the Marchash first asked him, "Well, I just want to ask you, since you come from the cities beyond the mountains, can you tell me if people what's the situation of people attending our Lord?" And he goes, day by day, less and less people are attending, but we're still keeping the faith. And he goes, good. So we still have to wait. And the president goes, wait for what? The day when no more people attend our Lord, we will leave this place. And then he asked the peasant to come in to the house, the little hut that was on the top of the hill. And it was gone on the side of the hill. So they walk up off the road, they open the door into this hut, and then on the inside of the hut, there's a huge cave. Within the cave, if you look closely, he showed the peasant to look over into the cave, deep into the mountains, and there he saw a whole army of knights on horseback, all asleep. There's a whole army. And the peasant goes, wow, what's this? And he goes, well, I'm King Marchash. That's the Black Army, and they're asleep. And then what he did was he grabbed his sword and he started to pull it out from its hoist. He pulled out a few inches, and all the soldiers started to lift out their head. The horses started snorting, stopping their feet, awakening. And then he pushed the sword back in, and they all fell asleep again. And then he goes, that's when he said, the day there are no more people attending church, when people turn their back on God, we will come out and put order in the world. Again, it's really interesting because they talk about the same thing about the Huns at the Alexander's gates or the Caucasus gates, how they're going to put order in the world. Yeah, it's amazing. So it reflects again through our continuous storytelling, mythology, folk tales, And yeah, and the Slovenians have this story about our King Marchash. Well, they was their king too, because, as I said, the Croatians, Slovenian, Schwabs, Turks, Romanians, even some Serbians, they all were underneath, and they were all under the Hun Empire. So it's quite interesting. So yeah, I thought I'd mention that because a glass of wine, it's nice. Hopefully I won't get too drunk. It's a really nice drop. And Morabor, I think they call it, is the oldest wine cellars in the whole of Europe. And they got the oldest wine grape or vine. No, it's not the oldest. Sorry, I tell a lie. They got the oldest vine there, and going back, and they got these beautiful cellars under King Marchash. They built into the mountains. One of the biggest. They got one of the biggest cellar systems for winemaking in the whole of Europe. They're grand, and honestly, there's a lot of. So if you like wine, anyone, and you don't, if you want to go somewhere really exciting, off the beaten track, go to Slovenia because they've got a lot of good history, culture. People are friendly, good food, value for money. Maybe they got expensive too, but definitely be cheaper than a lot of the Western Europe. Just food for thought for people. So another thing I didn't mention was, or maybe I touched on it, was Saint Martin of Tours. The French turned him into a saint. The Franks, yeah, I think it was the Franks, and they wrote about him as a Hun origin, his birth, but it wasn't actually Hun. They probably wouldn't have realised that back then it was still Sarmatia, but they were part of the Hun tribes who came in later. But the trouble is they throw words around which categorise, like even in Europe, some people call us Magyar, some call us Hungarian or Hun. So it really depends on the nation or when they come in contact with, or who write about us. But here, yeah, St. Martin is really interesting because that's where Advent starts, before leading up to Christmas. That's when people fast, and then they light candles usually have to make a wreath with 4 candles. One's pink, and the other 3 are white. And every weekend I went to a lecture on that too, St. Martin. Usually before Christmas, they usually have that St. Martin lectures every year. And I remember going to a few when they have St. Martin days. It's usually when it's the first new wine they have, and then they tell the stories to the kids. And they have, I remember listening to a couple of the old guys dress up in folk dress, and kids sit around and they tell about St. Martin stories. Again, very beautiful stories. And St. Martin was a Roman. He was under the Roman Pannonia at the time, and he's where he sees this poor man or beggar on the street. It's cold, and he stops and cuts his robe off, his uniform, and covers him to keep him warm. And that night he dreams that it was no other than Jesus that he had given the protection for keep him warm. And after that, he became real faithful to God, Jesus. A very interesting story, and that's where Advent starts from him. And we were already we already had Advent amongst the Huns before it actually got to celebrated in Rome. So again, St. Andrew and that really brought a lot of St. Martin, I should say, but St. Andrew as well. His teachings were here because he actually died or was executed in in Greece, St. Andrew, by the Greeks. But he, as I said, mentioned earlier, he actually taught in the Scythian Empire because he went east, St. Andrew. And his name isn't even Jewish. It's I think he was a brother of Peter, actually. So it's interesting. Yeah, St. Andrew, close to the Huns, or the Scythians as well, in the Dacian Empire. And again, it's interesting. I was reading only when I was researching the St. Andrew's history. A lot of it's very close to Hungarian Christian or Catholics as well. We hide it very. I mean, keep it very high in our teachings. But the same with the Greek Orthodox and the Orthodox people, because the Eastern Orthodoxy. What I was going to mention is, I was reading this section about how the Romanians claim they're the Dacia Empire. They just again hijack a history. Well, originally they came in the 13th century to Hungary because they had a big, but they're from Albania originally. And then they had to leave Albania because they were cast out by their king or leader. And then they asked the Pope actually asked Hungarian king if they can have refuge in protection in Hungary. So the Hungarian king at the time accepted them, and they were mainly shepherds and very simple peasants, and they were given protection within the kingdom, and for many years they lived amongst the Hungarians, and Hungarians were the first ones who gave them education. They opened universities and teaching for them to try and help them. And they're the ones who turned against us. So we tried to help them get educated and advance their culture, but it wasn't really. You can't really blame them to a degree, but again, it was when the nationalism started in the 19th century, and they wanted to divide the kingdoms. And Hungary had a lot of different nationalities, and Hungary let them keep their culture, language, and everything under the kingdom. So it wasn't a dictatorship like how often you go to America and that they only teach. You go to school, they only teach English. In Australia as well, or UK, you can't go to a school and learn, go to the whole school and learn a different language. But even the Hungarian king at the time opened the first university to encourage, or schools I should say, to encourage the Romanians to learn their own language. So what do you do? It's pretty, and then later they turn against us, and when nationalism, Freemasons again, they started this nationalism movement to break up the kingdoms. So everybody got patriotic and chauvinistic after the French Revolution as well. Chauvinism was a French officer or general or soldier. I think it was a general. That's where the word chauvinism actually comes from. And talking about French and German, when they went to attack Russia, like the Nazis against Russia, they lost because of the winter. Same with Napoleon when he went to war against the Russians. The cold, the winter, that's when they ended up. They weren't prepared properly, and they lost a lot of men. They can barely escape back to France, But it's interesting. Stephen Batory in the 15th century, he went to attack. He actually became the Polish and Lithuanian king as well back in 1576. I think it was 1575 around that time, and the Polish loved him, and he united. He was very anyway. He took on Ivan the Terrible, and there's even a picture of him, a beautiful picture of Istvan or Stephen Batory with him, and Ivan the Terrible bowing and kissing. I think he's kissing his hand or feet or something like that. I think he's kissing his hand, and and he attacked Russia during winter. He was so tactical and strategic. He actually sent the army with carpenters, so they would put up makeshift temporary housing for the soldiers and garrison to keep them warm during the winter. And the Russians were so unprepared for the battle that when they showed up, they just didn't, because usually they used to campaign during the autumn. Up until autumn, from spring to autumn, to have the battles. And he said, no, we'll take them on in winter. And he defeated them. See? So the Hungarians beat the Russians, not like the Germans and French, Napoleon. So, yeah, and Hitler. So that's something to be proud of, guys. So, and he was a Prince of Transylvania at the time, because back then we had the problems with the Habsburgs. There was they had just taken over, or in the process of taking over the throne. So we had a lot of issues with the Austrian Habsburgs. I'll drink a vino. It's nice. Let me see. Another point was the Apostolic Kingdom of Hungary. It was the only kingdom ever to be called the Apostolic Kingdom. And even Pius II, geez, I can't remember. You'd have to Google that. I'm not sure what year that was. I'm not sure it was the 13th or 14th century. But he said we were the model kingdom, the oldest kingdom of Europe. And yeah, so even back then we're documented as being a very old kingdom. So let me see. I think I spoke about Nimrod. Gesta. No, I didn't. I don't think I spoke about him. Nimrod is again for Attila and the rest of our kings he's like the grandson of Nimrod. And Nimrod plays a very big role in our history. And Simon Geza writes, he was a clergy, during the 13th century. He writes about, he wrote a lot of our chronicles at the time, and the Gesta Honorum, Deeds of the Huns and Hungarians, he wrote. And in there he writes about Nimrod and how he built the Tower of Babel, and it's not in the Bible. He actually wrote it, and he actually debates with the Catholic Church even that our writings are older than the Bible. So yeah, it's interesting. So, and the Arabs and the Jews are the ones who write negatively about Nimrod. He was the first king and ruler of the world. And he also, Geza also says that we're from Yosef, after Noah's kids, Yosef, not Ham. So it's debatable. I'm not sure. But that's from Geza Simon. So, and I think it's available in English as well. So if anybody wants to read it, I think they translated it in English in the 19th or 20th century. The Gesta Honorum, or something like that. Deeds of the Huns and Hungarians. Check it out. Be interesting. And I said he was a clergyman, a Catholic, and he on a daily basis would have been flicking the Bible on a daily basis. So, but I said a lot of the Bible has been rewritten over the last few hundred years, and very subtly here and there. So be careful how it's been interpreted. And even Judeo-Christianity doesn't exist, because either you're Judo, or you're Christian. You can't be both. One believes in the resurrection, that Jesus, Messiah came. The other one rejects it. So it's a very different teaching. And that's another one I want to talk about. I don't think I mentioned it as well. Metz is where Attila had gone to fight the Gauls, the Gauls, and the Metzers had like a St. Stephen church or auditorium or something like that. It's the only building he let stand. Because the Gauls were a nasty group. So he ended up because there's no writings on what the reason was why he went there, but there is writings that he left St. Stephen auditorium, only building standing in that region. So, and the interesting part about St. Stephen is he's the first king of Hungary, and he was the first martyr after Jesus, who was killed. The Pharisees stoned him to death. And he's got a very interesting speech, goes for an hour, and he talks about how continuously he kind of rattles off the whole history of the Pharisees, how they turn their back, and the Lord always gives them a chance, and they still despise him and treat him bad, and even talk about how they killed Jesus. But even on his death, when they're stoning him to death, he sees the skies open, and he goes, "Oh, forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they do." Again, this is what I mean. Christians even pray for their enemies, not like the Jews and Arabs who go for eye for an eye. They still believe eye for an eye, and there's no forgiveness or mercy. We should even pray for our enemies. That's the biggest love ever. And again, it even reflects back in a lot of our kings. They even claim a lot of our kings were not just kings, they even had the ability as prophets. And even Taltush, like St. Laszlo, he had a horse called Sug, a Taltush horse. And King Marchash had, what's his name? Janos Vitez, who actually painted on, actually I went there, and they have writings of, they used to have ceiling paintings of Janos Vitez had painted them even before they happened. And he 4 or 5 major pictures he writes up there of different stages of what will happen to the Hungarian kingdom. That's interesting. That's under King Marchash. So I might mention that under King Marchash when I do his, because I went there and there was some ceremony, and not everybody can get into that chapel. It's in Esztergom, and it's in a very nice and we had lunch and food and everything there. Vodka Tibor organised it. Dr. Vodka Tibor organised that. And and again, I was able to talk to the professors, and there was only a very intimate group that had this particular ceremony up there, and they had lectures. So it was very good. And he spoke about Esztergom is a very, very interesting place. So the history there is just amazing. You go there and you just look around at the position of it, the awe of it. It's run down a bit in places because the mayor, I don't know, they had a lot of political problems with the mayor. But even though it's run down, like some of the old buildings that need repair, there's just some energy there. It's just beautiful. You got to go there. It's just amazing. Huge basilica up there, and a lot of our kings were crowned there too. Some of them. So got some amazing history. Yeah. Esztergom. It's up on the border of Slovakia. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of finish up the Hun speech or talk I did. They're the kind of things I left out I would like to include in the last one. So I thought I'd just do the short video, or it went for about 40 minutes now anyway, roughly, about that. So, and the bread needs, I think the bread's going to be good. So I think I'll finish up, guys. I thought I'd just do that quick lecture and let you guys fill in the gaps that I left out in the previous talk. So anyway, yeah, so I'll keep some other not lectures, but other talks on different people throughout his kings or events that you might find interesting, which I saw in Hungarian lectures, which a lot of them are not even available in English or English side, and our Hungarian people, friends or family, and other Hungarians living abroad, or even other people interested in the history of Hungarians. You're welcome to do some research or listen or ask questions. Flick me some questions if you want in comments, if they allow it. I noticed some of the YouTube videos, comments are disabled by YouTube. I don't know why, but it must be touching sensitive information for some people or something. But anyway, God bless everybody. Keep well, safe, and talk to you soon. Have a good night. Bye-bye.